Okay, so we're continuing to work in Daniel, chapters 10 through 12, Daniel's last vision. Um, Before we move into chapter 12, does anybody have any questions or comments about what we've talked about so far? We're all good?
Well,
Yeah.
one thing I've heard, and I meant to say something the Thursday you did if the time ran out, was in Daniel chapter 11, verse 37,
Okay.
on the part where it says, okay, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women. That's the
Hmm.
part I will ask about. Nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. Nor the desire of women. I've heard some pastors, not all, but some pastors saying that this refers to him turning against the Catholic Church and the Virgin Mary. It don't make sense to me it would be that, but I have heard that from not a lot of pastors, but one in particular.
Okay. Yeah. So I hadn't heard that before, but I'm not surprised at that interpretation. So the I think what it means, I mean, there are lots of different suggestions that people have made about he will pay no regard, pay no attention um, to the one beloved or desired by women. Lots of different suggestions about that, ranging from the one that Shirley just offered all the way to, well, including things like this person will be a homosexual, or things like that. Um, I think probably the best interpretation there is that the desire of women is actually the Messiah. They were talking about the Jewish people, and this is a Jewish king that's being spoken of, and he has no desire for, no regard for the Messiah, and that this would be just a way to refer to the Messiah. And I base those comments on two things. One is that in Haggai 2:7, the desire of nations that's mentioned there is the Messiah, and it's the same word being used there for desire. And the second thing is that it's a well-known, you can see it in the Old Testament going all the way back to Judges, a well-known um, fact that Jewish girls who were not, who were Orthodox, who weren't apostate, Jewish girls desired to be the woman who would bear the Messiah. And so in that context, in the Jewish context, this phrase is most likely, I think, pointing to a disdain, that this person, this king, would have a disregard or a disdain for the Messiah. And as I talked about, um, we've been considering, and as I said, from chapter 11:36 to the end of the chapter, who and what is being talked about is in a lot of debate. We've been kind of exploring the king here as Herod the Great, and Herod the Great certainly showed great disdain for the one desired by women by, slaughtering all the babies, trying to kill the Messiah. So surely, I think to my understanding, I've surveyed some of the various interpretations, and the one I just offered makes the most sense to me. Um, but again, it's a debated passage. Um,
Mm-hmm.
is that What do you think of that?
Yeah,
Desire.
I think I like that. I think that one makes better sense to me. Your interpretation than it being, the Catholic and Virgin Mary. Not that I'm Catholic or worship Virgin Mary, but I just don't see it fitting in there myself.
Yeah, and a lot of the question, where it fits has to do with what time period's being talked about, right? And so, if this is
Right.
sometime in thousands of years from Daniel, then the Catholic Church, a reference to the Catholic Church might be there might be a reference there to the Catholic Church. But if this is something that is leading up to the coming of the Messiah instead of after the coming of the Messiah, then the Catholic Church doesn't really fit, because their veneration of the Virgin Mary didn't start officially until around 1870. So, they So that would be way too late for the parameters of the prophecy. So, and I think, Don commented last week, and I agree with him that even if I'm not sure who 1136 to 45 is talking about, I am sure that it's happening in some, it's contemporary, or at least in sequential chronological order with everything else that happened in chapter 35, and all of that stuff was BC. Chapter 11 verse 35 ends at about 60 BC, so you would expect that then the next person to be mentioned, who is this king, would be somewhere around that time.
Right.
And so I'm totally on board with that. I think that's the parameters of the prophecy, and so that there's nothing in the prophecy that would tell me I need to skip ahead thousands of years.
Right.
In fact, the prophecy portrays itself as a chronological succession of events that follow pretty closely. So, yeah. So, but other interpreters, the most popular interpretation, of course, is that this is an Antichrist figure. It's probably the Antichrist, in our future. And I talked about why people make that identification. I don't follow them, and I just can't. It doesn't seem like that's what the prophecy is about to me. And the interpretation that I'm advancing is held by, and has been held by, a small number of interpreters throughout church history, but it's by no means a majority. It's very much minority. But
well, just as dispensationalism is not in the minority.
Right. Dispensationalism, I think, I don't know if it's still the majority view in the United States, but it's if it's not the top eschatological view, it's the second one. So, but good question, Shirley, and I'm glad that was helpful.
Yes, you were. You kind of reinforced what I was kind of thinking to begin with.
Good. All right. All right, so let's move into chapter 12. So the prophecy itself ends in chapter 12, verse 4. So we've gone through the introduction, which was chapter 10, and then we've gone through verse by verse, chapter 11 in the chronological sequence that I think is being portrayed there. And the purpose, again, of the prophecy was not so that people would know particularly what was going to happen, but to see that after God did things, brought about the fulfillment of his word, that they would have confidence in him for the things that he had promised to them. Not just things about this prophecy, but things about their spiritual life and the forgiveness of their sins and his assurance that he's with them always, and things like that. The actual important things. So at that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never has been since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. That's where the prophecy ends. And then Daniel, or one of the angels, asks some questions at the end here, which kind of go back. Yeah, Mom.
So this is a little bit of an interruption, but would you please reiterate the connection between looking at Daniel and looking at Revelation?
Right. Okay. So for this particular passage that we're looking at, we've been looking at, we're going to finish up looking at 3 chapters, all for the sake of this connection, which is actually in a little further on in this passage. So it's Daniel. We'll just keep reading. It's going to be at the end of verse 7 where the connection is, and then I'll go back and read the passage in Revelation 2. So verse 5, Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others stood, one on this bank of the stream, and one on that bank of the stream. And someone said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream, how long shall it be till the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream. He raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it would be for a time, times, and half a time, and that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished. I heard, but I did not understand. So I'll read the next one. Then I said, "Oh, my Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things?" And he said, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end." All right, so it goes on. We'll read the rest of the passage in a little bit, but the connection there is verse 7, where we have the man clothed in linen who's above the waters of the stream. This is an angel, man clothed in linen, raises his hand and both hands, right hand and left hand, and swears by him who lives forever that at the conclusion of these events, this will be the outcome. So we go to Revelation chapter 10, and we see an echo, or actually a repetition, almost a repetition of this. Revelation 10, 5. No, we'll start in verse 1. Then I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven, wrapped in a cloud, with a rainbow over his head, and his face was like the sun, and his legs like pillars of fire. He had a little scroll open in his hand, and he set his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. And he called out with a loud voice like a lion roaring. When he called out, the seven thunders sounded. And when the seven thunders had sounded, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Seal up what the seven thunders have said, and do not write it down." Verse 5, and the angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and what is in it, the earth and what is in it, and the sea and what is in it, that there would be no more delay. But in the days of the trumpet call to be sounded by the seventh angel, the mystery of God would be fulfilled, just as he announced to his servants, the prophets. That is almost it's almost a repetition. It's obviously meant to send us back to Daniel, Daniel 12. We talked about the mystery of God, and that also has something to do with the book of Daniel. We looked at that. The mystery of God in Revelation 10 there appears to be the coming into history of the kingdom of God and the overthrowing of the other nations. The statue, think of the statue, Nebuchadnezzar's statue of the four kingdoms and the rock coming in the period of the fourth empire and demolishing the statue, basically. And then the small rock then grows to be a great kingdom that covers the entire earth. And that was the mystery of God. Yes, Mom.
So I'm just trying to process all this.
Okay.
Because I have avoided the book of Daniel like I've avoided the book of Revelation in the past. Okay.
Well, this is the hardest part of Daniel, this right here.
Yeah.
What
Okay,
we're talking about.
so the big picture is, I'm just going to say this, you can tell me if I'm wrong. The big picture that we're looking at is, we were trying to identify the time period in history that Daniel's talking about.
Correct.
And the quote end of things that Daniel's talking about, we are now saying is the same end of things that Revelation is talking about. And so we're trying to make the connection between the end of things being the coming of the kingdom when the Messiah was here.
Right.
In
Yeah.
Daniel, and therefore that's the same time period as Revelation speaks of. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, that's what we're doing. And of course, my approach, my understanding of this is, given how difficult the passage is, my understanding of the Daniel passage and its relation to Revelation is tentative. But these are these are plausible, and I believe I am strongly leaning toward, and see no reason not to lean toward that the Daniel passages are about, like everything in the Daniel, they terminate with the coming of the Messiah and his ministry, and then following that, the destruction of Jerusalem. And so I see that this, like every other long distance prophecy in Daniel, is going to terminate in the same time frame, and that the prophecy itself gives us no reason to think otherwise, but to think that this is it. And so then the difficult language that we encounter, like we just read about a resurrection, that's difficult language. We're compelled then to look at that and see if we have reason to interpret that not as a resurrection at the end of history, but reason for probably interpreting that in a first century context, and other things like that. And so we're kind of like just testing it out right now to see if this is sustainable. Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Don.
So do you think that the prophecies that Daniel is told to not write are the prophecies that came from the seven thunders?
No,
in
actually,
Revelation?
Daniel's not told to not write them. Daniel wrote down his prophecy, but he was told to seal it. And so it's actually the prophecies of Daniel that are sealed. That I'm not relating them to the seven thunders, but I'm just saying that Daniel's prophecy is sealed up. Meaning, what that means is that Daniel was not meant to understand them, but they were meant for somebody else later on to understand. And of course, as time goes on, from Daniel, if you just take this prophecy we're looking at, 10 through 12, when Alexander the Great shows up and then dies and divides his kingdom to his 4 generals, you would know what was, you would be able to understand that part. You could look at Daniel 10 and 11 and go, well, that just happened. I just saw that happen with my own eyes. And so it would be unsealed to you, but it would be sealed to Daniel because it's not for him. It's not for his encouragement, or he's not meant to understand it. This also helps us understand a little bit in Daniel 12, a passage that I think has been kind of abused. In verse 4, it's talking about the sealing of the book, Daniel 12:4. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. And the end, again, you think about, well, what is the end? That thing on the horizon for the Jewish people toward the close of the Old Testament history, the thing on the horizon was the coming of the Messiah, not the end of history. So the end there would be the end of this time of waiting for the Messiah. And then it goes on, it says, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. And I've read many interpretations of that, dispensational interpretations that I've read, that have to do with computers and cell phones and advertising and television, and knowledge will increase. Many will run to and fro. We're going to have airplanes and things like that. I think that, while a lot of people think that that's what the passage is about, I think the more natural explanation is that as time goes on, from Daniel's standpoint, he understands nothing. It's sealed up to him. But as time goes on and the events start to unfold, and many run to and fro, many go to and fro. He's talking about crossing the Holy Land. He's just given, 3 chapters of armies going back and forth in the Holy Land, and knowledge will increase. So many will run to and fro. These events will start to happen. You'll start to see them, and the knowledge of understanding these events will increase. I don't think it has anything to do with cell phones or internet or anything like that. I think it's in the context of Daniel, you won't understand it, but other people will. So that's just my my 2 cents on that one. It's not a hill you would die on, fighting for. You go, okay. But
so again, in chapter 12, verse 4.
Yeah.
It says, but you, Daniel, keep the words secret and the book sealed until the time of the end. So when he says keep the book sealed, it's your understanding that he is not giving Daniel understanding of that book.
Right, Daniel, right, that's right. Yeah, to be sealed is to have it be closed off.
Mhm.
But what words is he talking about? The words that have already been spoken, or
Well,
words that are unspoken completely?
no, he's talking about the words that have been revealed to Daniel in this prophecy of 10 through 12. And then he says it 2 other times in the book of Daniel, once in chapter 8 about the Greek period, and I don't recall the other time. Probably have it written down somewhere. Oh, it's just twice here. So again, in chapter 12, verse 9, he says, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end." So twice for this last vision, once for the vision in chapter 8. And of course, that what would be true of those visions is also going to be true of the far-reaching visions of Daniel, which he could understand some basic things. The Messiah is going to come, etc., but he wouldn't have any detailed understanding of it until the events occurred. So in the nature of the case, I think probably prophecy in general is sealed up to people until the event actually occurs, until God brings it to pass. You just know in general something that's going to happen.
It's kind of difficult. He says keep the words secret.
What translation are
yet-
you reading?
This is the New Revised Standard.
Okay.
All the same, aren't they?
So
No.
if I'm understanding correctly, it almost sounds like that he's telling them to keep it a secret so no one has knowledge of it. So when it is finally arrives and the words are exposed, it shows that the prophecy was from God and that it was not duplicated based on passing down the knowledge.
Okay. Yeah,
Mm.
I can see that.
But when he says keep
Yeah.
the words secret, that would indicate, that could indicate, that means that don't let anybody read these words until the time of the end.
Yeah, that's what it just comes out that that way no one can say, well, we talked about it and we made it happen. It is saying, no one had knowledge until it happened and then it was revealed. And this was said 1,000 years ago. This is the word of God.
Well, that's what I'm kind of referring to, is that these words of Daniel weren't kept secret from the people. They had the scrolls of the writing of Daniel even before Christ.
Right. Okay. So, and I think Becky, you had something to say. Go ahead.
So I'm picking a thread on this. So what occurs to me is that people are using the end of time and the end of the world synonymously, and that's creating great confusion. But the other part is, so my version says, but you, Daniel, roll up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. So to me, that's a physical act. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. So if the prophecy itself, not all of Daniel, but if Daniel's prophecy was sealed until Christ read it and fulfilled the prophecy, then to me, that would do two things. One is it would identify the time of the end. And the other thing is that, related to what Gail just said, is that the prophecy was unknown until Christ read it, that particular prophecy. Am I like totally off the path?
I think that's a good explanation. not totally
The
off the
thing is, the
path.
words were known.
Well, here's the thing. I think this is one of the sticking points, is that when the Lord says, and it doesn't say actually, most of the translations, Don, aren't going to say keep secret. They're going to say have something to do with shutting up the words, sealing the book, or sealing the scroll. So the sticking point is whether this is literal. Is Daniel to seal up the scroll, put it in a cave somewhere, and wait for someone to find it? Or is this the Lord's way of saying the contents of the scroll are sealed? Mom?
Is it also a way that the Lord would say, I am not going to reveal to anybody what this means until the Holy Spirit is given, who is the one who teaches us?
Mhm.
Yeah, it could be that too. Although I do think that the Holy Spirit would enlighten people as the events happened. We do know that, like some in the case of, say, the Maccabees, they tried to fulfill some of the things in Daniel 11, or actually they tried to. They understood the prophecy. The prophecy was that some violent men would arise and would fight against Antiochus IV, and that the violent men would fail. And they said, "Ha, we're going to prove that wrong. We're the violent men who are going to succeed." And then they failed. So they understood the prophecy. But so that was about 160. Go ahead, Mom.
It's God who gives the understanding
Yeah, it's God that gives
when
understanding.
he wants to.
Right.
Mhm.
So I don't think that what Daniel is being commanded is to literally take the scroll and make it unavailable. I think what he's being told symbolically is that this is not for your time. That there's no necessary understanding right now on your part. It's for a different time. In fact, if you go to chapter 8, Daniel 8, verse 26, and if you look at the outline, I gave some notes on Daniel 12. At the very bottom, bottom of the first page, I'm addressing verse 4. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, when we're talking about. And the first reference I've written is Daniel 8:6. That's incorrect. It's Daniel 8:26, if you want to correct that. Daniel 8:26. Mine says, the vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. So the Lord's explanation there of sealing, or the reason for the sealing, is that this isn't for your day. This is for some other day, many days from now. And so we have that happening here with the vision of the Greek kingdom. And then it happens again here with the vision going through the Greek kingdom all the way to the Roman times. By the time we get to the end of the Hasmonean period in verse 35, even before we get to what may be Herod, we're in the Roman period. The Romans became a force in Palestine, or in Israel, I guess Israel, Judea, in 63 BC. So that is, around at that verse 35 is about where they come in. So we have, and just to contrast that, if you go to Revelation 22:10, look at that. This is a fascinating reference. It's obviously playing off of Daniel 22:10. And he said to me, do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is near. That's nearly the opposite of the Daniel 8 one, right? Seal this up because it's going to happen, so many days from now. This one is don't seal it up, for the time is near. So if we're trying to determine a period of time when Revelation is the events in Revelation, most of them are going to occur, or how relevant the prophecy would be to the first audience. One of the easy ways you could do that is to say, well, chapter 8 in Daniel's given that vision around 600 BC. This is about the Greek period, which is 400 BC, something like that. 300 BC. Alexander the Great's 323. So 300 BC. So we have 300 years, 270 years between the vision of chapter 8 and its fulfillment, 270 years. And that's a long time, and you should seal it up. But for Revelation, don't seal it up. The time is near. It's less than 270 years. It's not thousands of years.
Verse 10 and chapter 22, though, we're in chapter 22 now. I thought that everything in 22 is in our future.
Yeah, so we get back to the question of the structure of the book, right? So, right. So, of course, the consummation events, I guess I shouldn't say of course, but the consummation events are in our future, the consummation events being the bodily return of Christ, the physical bodily resurrection of all peoples, the general judgment, the consigning to heaven and hell, the eternal rewards, the new heavens and the new earth, all of those things, which Revelation 21 and 22 speak about, in actually 20 a little bit at the end, 20, 21, and 22. Those things are in our future. But just as, but I think the bulk of the book of Revelation was meant for that. The first century audience would completely understand what was going on and would be living through a lot of that. And so it's not sealed up to them because they're meant to understand it, which reflects what chapter 1, verse 3 says, blessed is he who keeps the words of this prophecy. They're supposed to do it. They're supposed to do it. And that's because it's relevant to them in their time period. Whereas Daniel's not required to respond in any way to the vision except to write it down.
Yeah.
So I think that's a significant difference, and it's interesting how those verses, how Revelation 22:10 is repeating the commands in Daniel, except it's now saying don't seal it up. And I think that's a real clue, for the first century audience. Well, actually for us, I think they would have understood it immediately. But for us, it's a clue that they were meant to understand it and respond to it because they were going to live through it. So, yeah. So how did we get on this? Dawn asked a question. That's how we got here.
Well, I have a question too.
Yeah.
In Daniel, but
Sure.
mine is on verse 7.
Okay.
And it's based on some things I've heard again. And it's the second part of it where it says, and swore by him who lives forever that it shall be for a time, times and a half. And when he, with the little h, shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. And what I've heard on that is that the times and a half refers to the 3.5 years, the last half of the Great Tribulation, when, persecution will be brought upon Israel, and that the little h refers to the Antichrist, who will be bringing that persecution on Israel in the latter times. So, comment on that.
Yeah. So my comment's going to be really unsatisfactory, I think. That I've heard that and read that. That is a popular interpretation. It's dispensational interpretation. My comment has to do with the time, times, and half a time. The designations of time that are given in cryptic ways, like that one, and like in Daniel 9:77s, that these are there is endless debate over how to understand these time, excuse me, these time frame references, and it is a one of the things that a dispensationalist interpreter will do is they make these time periods refer to years so that they're easily understood. Well, I don't know about the so that, but that makes them easily understood to us. But there's really nothing in the text itself that would help us make that identification. In fact, there's nothing in the text that tells us how long this period is, except for at the end of it, the shattering of the holy people, the shattering of the power of the holy people is accomplished. And so whenever that is, now what Daniel has asked, if we're looking at chapter 12 here, what Daniel has asked is, how long will it be until the end of these wonders that you've shown me? No, actually, the angel asked that. And how long will it be until the end of these wonders? And the wonders are the works of God in bringing about his stated purpose or his divine purpose there. And so when we look at the vision itself, we have a prophecy that covers events that start happening right at the time that they basically skip over the Persian period with just a quick mention, but then they start with Alexander the Great. So they're starting about the same place as Daniel 8 is about. And so they start there, and then they go from Alexander the Great through up to the 1st century. So 300 years or so, 350 years, chronological prophecy. And then if we get to 1136, like those ants, we hit that wall and we scatter all over the place, and maybe there's different interpretations of 1136. But if you stick with a 1st century or near 1st century thing, then what happens, what it brings you to is that the end of these events is somewhere in the 1st century. And if that's the case, and they started in the Greek period, say they started in the Greek period and they end in the 1st century, then time times and half a time actually covers about 400 years. But if to be a literalist, and dispensationalists are literalists, that's what they're known for. That's what they always say, they're literalists. If you want to be a literalist about it, and you want to also have Daniel 11 skipping way ahead 2,000 years to the final Antichrist, then you've got a prophecy that starts in the Greek period and that ends 2,500 years later at the time of the final Antichrist, or even more. And that all of that time is a time times and half a time. So, but of course, dispensationalists don't want to be literal there. They want to project everything out and take the time times and half a time and make it fit in. They're trying to fit it in with Daniel 9. And one day we'll look at Daniel 9, but it doesn't fit. It doesn't, the context here is, it seems to me to be a symbolic expression symbolic of a long time. I mean, you could just as easily say a time and half a time is the Persian period, which Daniel is in, the Greek period, which is Alexander the Great, etc., and partway into the Roman period. You could easily say that. So, which I'm not offering at all as a valid or useful interpretation. I'm just saying that since we're going to just guess, we could guess that. So the way I approach the prophecy here, I mean, I just kind of outlined it there, is to say, well, what is the time frame being talked about? And that's whatever the time frame is what this means, because the question was, how long will it be? And so it'll be a time times and half a time. And how long is that? Well, it's 400 years or it's 2,500 years, but it's not 7 years. It starts in the Greek period and it ends, it at least goes through Antiochus. That would be, 180 years to get to him. So it's at least 180 years and probably longer. So we're going to have the same type of problem when we get to the numbers in verse 11 and 12, the 1290 days and the 1335 days. Interpreters have talked a lot about what that could mean. Nobody knows for sure. The closest thing that seems reasonable, although I don't know how it fits in the context, is that the period between the taking away of the daily sacrifice and the setting up of the slaughter of the pig on the altar was actually about 1260 days. So it's really close to the 1290, when Antiochus did it, but it's not 1290. And nobody knows what the 1335 means. It's 45 more days, which is roughly a month and a half. So we get to these numbers, and I think the best way to know what, anyway, I don't know what the best way is, but I'm pretty sure that nobody understands those numbers.
Mhm.
And so I don't want to be dogmatic about it, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't mean 3.5 years when we say times and half a times, because it wouldn't fit. If we just
Mhm.
substitute it in this prophecy, and we say, well, it's going to take 3.5 years, Daniel. Well, then why would it be sealed up to Daniel, for one? And how could it possibly cover all that time, all those events in 3.5 years? So
it's your understanding that the beginning point of the 3.5 or the times and half a times is pretty clear.
yeah, oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely clear. And I would be surprised if you could find a commentator anywhere that would say that, so we're talking about Alexander the Great. So that's verse 3 of chapter 11. I would be very surprised if you could find a commentator who didn't say that was Alexander the Great.
Even dispensationalists.
Oh yeah, even dispensationalists. Everybody agrees all the way up to verse 36.
Mm.
Well, that really presents a problem for them then.
Yeah, that seems to present a
I
problem.
mean, to say that it begins in the Greek period and it will end
2,000
in time
years.
yet to come.
Yeah, and that seems to be problematic. Becky.
Well, the math side of my brain looks at that and it says that times is not defined as twice as many as time.
Right.
It could be 40 times.
Yeah.
We have time and we have half a time, so we can put those together and figure that half a time is half a time.
Right.
But there's no definition to what the plural of times is. And so
Yeah.
saying it's 3.5 of anything, whether it's a year, a decade, a century, whatever, there's fault in that assumption because we don't know how many more times is.
Right.
Mhm.
Exactly. That's vague. And so, and again, I think the purpose of giving the prophecy is not to say you can write this on a timeline, right? You can put this on a chart.
Mhm.
That's definitely not the purpose. And so the descriptions of how long will it take are vague and very difficult. They're not meant to be figured out. And so, it defeats the whole purpose of sealing it up if you
Oh, if you can figure it out.
if you can figure it out, right? So the
Wouldn't
time,
it even,
yeah,
Chuck, wouldn't it even require, based on what you're saying, that they would have to understand multiplication?
well, I think they
I mean,
did.
did
Yeah.
they even have that level of sophistication in math at that point? I mean, so to me,
They
it's
did.
to me that is, they would have to understand multiplication, and I don't think that that is something that was even in the horizon at that
Yeah.
point.
Well,
Right.
so let me just mention that all of those things that you study in, your proofs and all of that, the Pythagorean theorem and Euclidean geometry and things like that, those are from the Greek period, BC. Yeah, so they understood pi, which involves some amazing calculations and geometry and circles and things like that. And so they understood division, and of course they would understand multiplication by inference. Yeah, they were math geniuses. They were way smarter than us. So,
Mhm.
But Stoics,
yeah. So, but the point about, if God gives the prophecy so that you won't, so that you will see after he's fulfilled it how faithful he was, then it defeats the purpose to give you a timeline.
Mhm.
Because you're supposed to, it's supposed to engender hope, right? Hope, not certainty, hope. So that's talking about the time things. And when we eventually talk about Daniel 9, we're going to have the same type of conversation. Daniel 9 is that prophecy where some translations say 77s of years or 77s of weeks, but actually what the Hebrew says there is 77s of what? Who knows? Nobody knows. 77s. And how do you know how long it is? Well, you don't. And even though some interpreters have said, well, this comes down right to the day that Jesus entered Jerusalem, the assumptions that they're making are really gratuitous on that. So again, it's the same type of vagarity that you get with all of the time references. They're not meant to reveal. Okay, they're not meant to reveal. If you could figure it out, then it's it's undermining what the purpose is. So yeah, Mom.
So this is a little bit of an amusing comment, but I like your statement that if the time frame was precise and we knew exactly when things were going to happen, it takes away hope. And I'm thinking about the promise of Jesus returning. If we knew that Jesus was going to return in the year 2756, we would do what Ecclesiastes says: eat, drink, and be merry, for
right,
tomorrow we will die.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if we knew, so this again, another comment about a dispensational timeline. So dispensationalists today will say that nobody knows when the Lord will return, but once the rapture happens, everybody knows when the Lord will return, because, well, depending on if you're pre-trib or mid-trib or post-trib or pre-wrath, you could add 7 years or 3.5 years or whatever it is to the day, and that's when the Lord will return. And it's like, well, no. No. Nobody knows. Nobody will always know. So, yeah, interesting. Interesting. People commit themselves to things with various views that they don't want to commit themselves to.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to look at those things and go, well, I don't want to commit myself to that, so I can't commit myself to this other thing that entails that. So, well,
and they say,
Well,
well,
Jesus himself don't even know when it's going to come. Only God the Father in heaven knows.
absolutely. And yeah, so, and Jesus could do the math. If it was just 7 years after the rapture, he could figure it out. But because he knows how to add and multiply. So, well, let's look at, since we're just talking about shutting up and sealing the book, and then we'll go back and talk about Daniel 12:1 next time on Thursday, because we're almost out of time. But let's look at Isaiah 29:11. Isaiah 29:11. I know it's in here somewhere. It's probably after verse 10, huh? Let's maybe back up to verse 9 here. It says, astonish yourselves and be astonished. Blind yourselves and be blind. Be drunk, but not with wine. Stagger, but not with strong drink. For the Lord has poured out upon you a spirit of deep sleep, and has closed your eyes, the prophets, and covered your heads, the seers. And the vision of all this has become to you like the words of a book that is sealed. When men give it to one who can read, saying, read this, he says, I cannot, for it is sealed. And when they give the book to one who cannot read, saying, read this, he says, I cannot read. And the Lord said, because this people draw near with their mouth and honor me with their lips, while their hearts are far from me, and their fear of me is a commandment taught by men. Therefore, behold, I will again do wonderful things with this people, with wonder upon wonder, and the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the discernment of their discerning men shall be hidden. And you who hide deep from the Lord your counsel, whose deeds are in the dark, and you say, who sees this, who knows us? You turn things upside down. Anyway, the part about sealing, you have that whole thing in 9 through 11. The Lord's word is sealed off from these people, and what that means is they can't understand it. Not that it's actually sealed off, because the picture includes handing a book to somebody, and they say, well, it's sealed, or I can't read it. But the idea is that the Lord sends the people prophets, and in this case, they harden their hearts, they blind their eyes, they stop up their ears, and he says that word is sealed. The word is sealed to you. And we have passages here that Jesus quotes in his ministry. But so the idea of sealing up is really about what is the response and the responsibility. Daniel is told to seal up the book, not because the people have hardened their hearts, but because it's not for them. They won't understand it because it's not for them. These people here in Isaiah, the word is for them, but they won't understand it because they've hardened their hearts. And so the Lord has said, it's a sealed book to you. It's a sealed book. So
They say, we cannot read this because it is sealed. So they're not actually saying that they can't read words. They just can't interpret them.
yeah, they can't interpret it. Right.
Mhm.
The meaning of this is hidden.
Well, that sure makes more sense than, why did he give them a book and say, here, you were able to read this book. And then they say, no, I can't read it. Well,
And
it makes sense.
Isaiah goes on to say in verse 17, I think that's a 17, in a very short time will not Lebanon be turned into a fertile field, and the fertile field seem like a forest? In that day, the deaf will hear the words of the scroll, and out of gloom and darkness, the eyes of the blind will see.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
So they say, we can read it, but it does not compute.
Doesn't make
Yeah.
sense.
So I think one of the other things we might consider when we look at, when we think about Daniel 10 through 12. So at the end of that vision, Daniel's told to seal up the scroll. And we talked about what that means. In Revelation 10, the angel shows up, the angel who's straddling the water and the earth, just like the angel standing above the rivers, and the one who swears. He shows up and he's got a sealed scroll in his hand. And he's given it to John. And so, in the imagery, it's possible, although I'm not certain, but it's possible that the imagery is saying the thing that Daniel saw, this is about to be completely revealed. The completion of it is coming now. And John is prophesying about it. And so
we're also considering the possibility that when they talk about these 7 seals, we're not talking about scrolls that are rolled up with a wax seal on them. We're talking about words that have been available to read in the past, but not understood until now. When you remove the seal, you remove the confusion of these words.
right. Yeah, I think that's right, because the physical, the picture of the scroll being sealed is just a symbol, and the symbol is understanding or not, right? So
Oh, wow.
Good
Yeah.
stuff.
Oh, good. I was praying hard about this morning because I thought this is a really, really hard passage.
Oh,
And the
and we
Lord-
got you totally derailed.
Yeah, so Thursday I'm going to be praying hard. This is a really, really hard passage.
But you
Yeah.
were concerned about the pushback you might get, you mean?
No, not the pushback. No, I don't pray about I pray for you guys to understand what's true,
Under-
but I pray for me to be clear and to be sufficiently tentative where tentativeness is warranted, and to communicate that there are many different ways that people have interpreted some of the passages we talked about, and that I'm offering the one that makes the most sense to me, and I'm not in Daniel here trying to do a whole defense. I'm just giving you top level. And if you have questions, ask them, but it does warrant more investigation on your part before you say, okay, yeah, I take that to be true. So yeah, I just want to be clear and careful.
So we can admit to, for example, a dispensationalist that, yeah, we think that some of this is still sealed up to us today.
Hmm.
Right?
Some
I mean,
of it
some of this will be unsealed in our future.
right, yeah, because the totally unsealing of it, the is at the completion of it, right? The thing about future oriented prophecy is you never really know what's going to happen till it happens. So, which is why that question about, well, how did the Jews miss their Messiah is kind of unfounded. We look at the Old Testament prophecies and we go, look, they fit Jesus so perfectly. But you cannot construct a picture of Jesus prior to Jesus appearing. So,
Well, after the times and half a time, when it's available to us, we're going to have, backwards vision, and it's going, oh, okay, I get it. Of course. How did I not see that?
That's right. Yeah.
But until that's revealed, we're going to go, yeah, I don't know. That's not actually the important part.
Right. It's not the important
part. Those of us who like numbers like to clam onto that and go, well, how much is a time?
Yeah, could be nearly anything.
Yeah.
And until you figure that out, the rest doesn't even, there's no time, no reason to spend any time on it.
Exactly.
Well, so speaking of time, we've reached the end of our time this morning. So I want to thank you all for your participation, and your questions and comments have been really good. I think it's been a good time this morning, and it's always great, but it was less challenging than I had anticipated. So thank you for that. I'm going to just ask somebody to pray. So I'm going to ask Becky, can you pray for us?
Certainly.
Thank you.